All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm glad that my schedule hasn't gotten so crazy. I haven't gotten anything yet to prevent me from streaming. So happy that I can stream as usual. Let me know if anything is awry in audio video land. Hey, Lincoln, glad you could hang out. I thought this time, as you can see from the title, right, want to talk about making your big bad evil guys or gals or things, creatures, work. And what I meant by that was giving them limitations. And I suppose I should explain first, maybe before we can get further into discussing it, what exactly I mean. Because I think most people would say, well, my big bad evil guy is a demon, and you can see on their character sheet that, I don't know, holy damage will do, extra damage to them. They'll take double damage from positive energy, and they can do this and they can't do that, and doesn't that essentially qualify as limitations? And I would say, sure, yes, those do. But those types of limitations don't really have much effect on the overall campaign so much as in the whenever the last confrontation is, right? And what I'm talking about is the kinds of limitations, the kind of weaknesses that will be meaningful, not just in the final battle or final time the party meets up, or when they find the one thing that will destroy this creature or send it back to its plane or do something like that. I'm not looking at that kind of thing. What I'm talking about are things that can be effective and useful from when they first step on the page or get in the game through to the end. The kind of weaknesses that aren't just for players to discover and exploit, though that's part of it, but that they also become guiding laws almost for what our bad guy can do, what they can't do, which help us as GMs figure out, well, what do they need to do, right? So if I feel like, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in a lot of campaigns, the big bad evil guy ends up just being, depending on the nature of the campaign, either one step ahead of the PCs or one step behind the PCs. And as GMs, we sit there and say, okay, wherever the bad guy needs to be, or we sort of want them to be for tension purposes or whatever, that's where they're going to be. So if the party is delving through the dungeon, the big bad evil guy's henchmen will be kind of right on their heels. Or perhaps the party is chasing, and then the big bad evil guy right in front of them. Or when they get somewhere, the big bad evil guy will always be kind of just to be there behind them, just because as maybe we think as a storytelling tool or as a tool of building tension or some other meta tool, that's where we want them to be. Maybe not thinking about in terms of who this bad guy is, do these things make sense? And this is something that has frustrated me as a player on occasions in a game, for example, where let's say we have to go through tons and tons of hoops and go through side quest and NPC and this or that to say get the map to the hidden thing, right? So we went through all this work to get this map to the hidden thing that nobody could find. And we finally get that map and we finally set out, and the big bad guy's right behind us with no explanation of, well, how did they get the map? Right? Or how do they know? Why couldn't we have done what they did? Right? Was there an easier way? Because we went through these quests thinking this is the only way. We got to find the one sage, the sage who's blind but can see. But in order to get him, we have to get the diamond of shifting colors from the desert. And in order to get that, we had to get something else. And all this stuff happens. And here's the BBEG right on our heels, because that's just where he's supposed to be, right? To keep the pressure on, keep us moving. And while that, I'm not gonna say it's wrong. That's fine if it works for you. But in terms of, especially if we want the party to think outside the box and maybe not take very linear paths and maybe think about other ways to address problems, having an antagonist, I'm just going to call them an antagonist rather than BBEG, having an antagonist that isn't just all powerful in the sense of they're going to show up exactly where they need to be when they need to be there, gives the party different things to work with. And I think it forces us as GMs to think about the steps that this antagonist is going to need. So if we needed to get this thing, right, this Maltese Falcon, and we need to go through these things to get the treasure, and there's only one of these maps, and the party gets the map, then if I'm the antagonist and I know the same thing as the party generally, which is the Maltese Falcon, and they get the map, now I have to think about, well, how does this antagonist get the Maltese Falcon if they realize that the one map the party already has, right? That forces me that forces the antagonist through me as the referee to figure out, do they know the party has it? How can they find out who has it, right? So that they need the map. How can they find out who has the map? How long does that take? What resources do they need to do that? And I can chart all this stuff out. And I can say, okay, it's going to take at least this long. I can tie it to some dice, but at least I know, okay, that's step one. How do they find out who has the map? Then step two, what do they do about it? Right. So the party has the map and they figure that out. Okay, well, where's the party at this point? The party maybe is inside the ruins already. Can the big bad evil guy, do the antagonists, do they have spells they could use? Do they have minions they can send out? There's a lot of things, but this stuff only occurs to me if I'm thinking in terms of the fact that when they're not, forward in the story, when they're not basically on the screen, so to speak, when they're not in the moment with the party, these only occur to me because I'm thinking they're not omniscient. They can't just, because the party is there, just poof, they know where the party is, and so they just beeline, right? Oh, we got to go out in the desert, and poof, the antagonist is there because we need the antagonist there. I have to think through these steps. So I feel like limitations are a useful tool in that way to set up when you're thinking about I've talked about in other videos, using fronts or using a system basically tracking progress, right? Well, it's in terms of if you're going from, say, a cult from 0 to summoning Orcus, right? We look at kind of what does that cult need in every given step, right? And that determines how they're going. Part of figuring out is, well, they're limited, right? Okay, they need 5 things. They can't just summon Orcus. They need these things. They need certain things. That sets up the steps. So talking within the limitations. So in the one sense, we can say the limitations are helpful because they establish what kind of things your antagonist or antagonists are going to need to do. If they need to do this goal, they can't just get there. And if we're playing a system that, let's say, is not... We're trying to be, I want to say realistic, but we're trying to stay within the context of the fiction, right? We're not just going to have them show up just to show up because on a meta level, I need them to be there. Then this gives me guidelines of, if the antagonist needs to be able to get to the plane of fire, then they need to, and then I'm not going to just say, yes, they just happen to have the rod of planar travel to the plane of fire. I'm going to say, hey, Dave Mills, what's up? I'm going to say instead, well, they need to be able to get that rod or some other method, or they need to find the one magic user who they know or who they can determine has a planar travel spell, those kind of things. I think the other thing that having weaknesses or limitations will do is these can be surfaced to the party. And it gives the party more weapons and ways to deal with issues. And we've mentioned this in different videos, right? So the party maybe has a tendency to go bust down the front door because that's really what we present them with. If we present them with more options of attack, they're more likely to take them, or options of what to do. If we don't want everything to be a race to the finish line, we want to have our party think in not so linear terms. We have to give them the ammunition to do that. Hey, Bob Mosdell, let's see. He says, I think dice and a little AI chart might be an answer to some of what will the antagonist do next. Yes, I think that will work as well. I think there are many ways to get there. I think we can get to the mechanical bit first. or we can get to the mechanics. I think there are lots of ways to figure out. The first thing to figure out, though, is what can they do and what can't they do, right? Beyond whatever it says on their sheet, because I think we don't tend to think about that. I think we tend to think about, well, when they get into battle with the evil guy, if Strahd shows up, here's Strahd's abilities. But then when they're outside of that, we tend to say, let's say in Barovia, that Strahd's just going to show up wherever he can show up and do whatever he wants to do because he's Strahd and you're in Barovia. Or it might be helpful to think about, well, what can't Strahd do in Barovia? Like even in Barovia, even there, well, what if he could just do anything, then it would be a hopeless cause. You could never get to him because he could just do whatever he wanted, right? He's not Q in Barovia, right? He can't snap his fingers and make you disappear. There are limits. So if we think about what those limits are, then that enables us as GMs to then find out ways, or at least have the option of ways that this information might get to the players, either through their own discovery, right? For example, let's say in Barovia at noon, kind of in the middle of the day, Strahd is at his weakest. So he's generally not going to mess around. He's not going to do things. He's going to lay low. After a couple days in Barovia, this might be, or longer, this might be something that the party can figure out just through their own experience, through people saying, hey, lay low until noon, because at noon, at the high sun, we can talk, right? Because Strahd is not going to be active at that time. And then the party can think, oh, really? Well, that leaves some interesting ideas. Maybe there's some ways we can manipulate this to our advantage now knowing that. That's how you get a lot of kind of more emergent ideas. But if there's nothing like that, then they don't have anything to do. But then the one thing that they're probably going to fall back on, which is at some point, gear up, march to Strahd's door, and just try to kill him wherever he happens to be. If instead you think about, even if they do end up having to kill him, say maybe we can lure him out. Maybe we can trick him somehow. Maybe we can force his hand to have to show up at high noon at where the sun's at its peak, where he's going to be weakest, and make the fight more on our terms. Now, how do we do that? Now you get some really interesting ideas. Bob Monstel's back. He says, have I looked at Worlds Without Number faction system? Overkill for people that aren't me, but I find faction play interesting. You also mentioned Dungeon World Fronts, which I'm enamored of. I haven't looked at Worlds Without Number yet. It's on my list. There's just so much stuff that comes out. But yeah, I definitely want to check out their tools with factions and other things. I'm going to go back to Lord of the Rings, and I know that I've been harping on Lord of the Rings for, it feels like forever now, but there are very good examples in there of Tolkien setting up limitations and weaknesses of different agents of the enemy and the enemy itself, and how it isn't just something that's there for flavor, but has real impact. I'm just getting in that podcast that I keep referencing that's going through Lord of the Rings. I'm the section where they're talking about Weathertop. The parties arrived at Weathertop. Dave Mills says Blades in the Dark has excellent faction play rules. Yeah, I've read Blades in the Dark a while ago. I should probably go back to that. Back to Weathertop. So they're the fellowships at Weathertop, and they know that the ring wraiths are there. And Strider talks about how they're essentially weak to flame. That the fact that they have firewood, they're in a little. It's fairly a bit different in the books than the movie, which I had forgotten how different the moment is in the movie. They're actually in this little bowl, sort of dell, little valley, vales, small kind of bowl, little in right by, basically besides Weathertop, which is not a massive hill the way it looks like in the movie. And they know the ring wraiths are there, but they don't have anywhere to go. They don't want to move because it's night's falling and the ring wraiths are getting stronger, right? So they know the ring wraiths are weaker during the day, but now it's night falling. But they know that, but Strider tells them, hey, flame can be our friend. The Rangers had earlier, sometime before, had left firewood in this little cleft, and that they have something now. And they say, hey, that's a weakness of theirs. Hey, Tank Pal. Nice to see you. So you end up with a situation of, we know the ring wraiths are tough, but it's been established, several things have been established about them. They are not physically forceful. Earlier on in their dealings with different things that the hobbits and the fellowship kind of hear about in their travels, the ring wraiths aren't just going around slaughtering people. whether they just won't or can't. I mean, it seems like they can't because they're, why wouldn't they if they could? Can't do it. They're mostly active at night. So it means that during the day you are safer. Here we have a weakness to flame. So what does this all mean on a meta perspective if we were playing the One Ring, or we were playing the old MERP RPG, or we were playing someone's homebrew Lord of the Rings type universe in a game? It would mean that we have options. It would mean that we could look at that situation and try to put together what we know, what we've learned about those creatures, either through our own interactions, maybe through some lore type discovery, maybe through some interactions with NPCs. What do we know, right? And so we have certain things we can do. So the party has options to deal with things, and those options exist because the ring wraiths aren't just like uber just super villains, or they're not just sub bosses, right? And this exists outside of combat. The fact that these weaknesses they have aren't things that just are helpful to you when you're in combat with the ring wraiths. They are helpful for you in dealing with the ring, or helpful to the players, I should say, when dealing with the ring wraiths wherever they happen to be, right? You could be trying to evade them, and then when you're evading them, you're thinking about, well, I know that they're excellent at night, and I know they're not excellent during the day. So what is my strategy maybe for trying to stay ahead of them? I want to definitely make most of the use of daylight, and I probably want to try to find the hunkers down most hidden place I can during night. Like, that's a strategy, right? So maybe I should say that if I was going to make this neat and tidy, is you find these creatures and these weaknesses, these limitations, allow your players to develop strategies. And when I'm talking about, say, that the main antagonist as opposed to like your random creatures, yeah, random creature stuff is great, right? But the weakness, say, for trolls against fire really only comes up when you get into combat with trolls, and suddenly you're thinking, okay, great, I know they're weak against fire, so I'm going to use fire. But in this case, it's about these weaknesses, these limitations that can surface outside of that. Unless you know you're going through the troll fens, and unless you know that maybe trolls will just avoid fire, which they might. I don't know. I've never had people play up trolls where they're sort of environmentally, they're not going to say have a random encounter with trolls because they hate fire. But we could do that. It might be interesting to do that. So if you know you're traveling through hills that are ridden with trolls, carry a lot of torches and make a show of having flame at all time, and maybe they would stay away from you. But that doesn't tend to happen. So I guess maybe I would say maybe this strategy ultimately is good for any types of creature, but in particular, I think I'm focusing here on the main villains and sub villains. Tank Pal says Blaze in the Dark has a very good faction and team/crew system. Been reading on it some lately. Very interesting to me. Yeah, I think there's a fair amount of the Powered by the Apocalypse games have really been into kind of faction play. And some of this definitely comes into faction play because usually your main antagonists themselves are a faction or the head of a faction. And it's worth thinking about in factional terms as well. What can a faction do? And here more specifically, I'm talking about, well, what can't they do? And how do you reflect that in the game? So if we're going to say that, okay, we're going to talk about, going back to Lord of the Rings, like Sauron. What can Sauron do? What can Sauron not do? It's interesting because by the time you get to Fellowship of the Ring, as opposed to earlier stories like in the Silmarillion, Sauron's greatest power has actually been taken away from him. He can no longer change forms. He cannot change shape. He cannot become... Sauron was someone who did most of their damage because they were able to be so persuasive, right? Take on fair forms and get into creatures' ears and talk to them and just subtly turn and twist them. That was maybe his greatest asset, at least after Morgoth fell and he got captured. He can't do that anymore, right? I think we know, but at least by Return of the King, he has his shape back. He can now take solid form, but it's forever sort of a marred, not attractive shape. So these are things that we know about him. We know about him that he maybe because of the shape, because of the fact that he is not as strong as he once was, due to him putting so much of his essence in the ring, that he's not likely to leave Barad-dûr and go marching around himself, right? He's not going to do that. He's going to leave that to his servants, like the ring wraiths. So you're putting all this together and you're getting a picture of the world. and how the world operates and how the party can maneuver in the world. And with this information out there in some form, or at least being available, I'm not saying you have to spoon feed it all to your characters. Here are Sauron's weaknesses, everybody. Read up on it, right? But having them in our mind means that when we're thinking about, well, what is the Sauron or the Sauron faction, however you want to talk about it, what are they doing and how are they doing it? Then they have to take on specific tasks. Okay, Sauron has got Gollum, and Gollum then tells him, ring Baggins. Sauron doesn't know where the Shire is, right? There's another thing, right? This is not even a weakness or limitation of his actual powers. This is just of their knowledge, which is also useful. Sauron doesn't know Baggins, has no idea who that is, doesn't know where the Shire is. He's got to find them all. So his number one plan becomes number one checkpoint. All right, find the Shire, find Baggins. Right? If Gandalf were our PC, Gandalf knows the Shire, right? Sauron shouldn't just appear behind Gandalf, following wherever he goes to keep the pressure on Gandalf. That might be great from sort of a meta, oh, I want to keep the tension on, but ultimately it's very shallow. Instead, Sauron has to make his plans. He has to get the ring race going, gear them up, get them horses, and then have them go off. And then on the ring race task list has to be, first, figure out where in the world the Shire might be, because it could be anywhere. I mean, it's not even that they know, oh, it's between the Misty Mountains and the sea or something like that. They have no idea where the ring is. So they got to find that. They got to narrow it down, find someone who knows that the Shire exists. From that person, find out where the heck the Shire is, then get to the Shire, right? And then find in the Shire, find Baggins, and presumably the last step, grab Baggins and drag him back to Mordor. That's a lot of steps. But Sauron and his faction, the Mordor faction, having to go through all those steps allows a lot of room for the Fellowship, or in this case, the party, to maneuver. Gandalf can try certain things because he knows he can make, or he doesn't know, but he can make some kind of guesstimate. He can make a plan. I know that the ring race have left, but I know that, God, they could spend months running around trying to find the Shire. It's not a big place. It's not particularly well known. It's fairly hidden. So that leaves me time to do a few things before I have to tell Frodo to leave, right? And Frodo, I know, can have plenty of time to get over to Rivendell to be somewhat safe because of all these pieces that are moving. Now, of course, in the book, it doesn't turn out this way, not because he was wrong in his planning, but because certain parties didn't execute maybe as much as they could have. But the fact is that it was these limitations of the antagonists, in this case, the Mordor faction, if we want to call it that allow him to be thinking about these things, allow him to try to take a move that might be risky, allow him to kind of make a gamble and see if it pays off or not. And those are the kind of choices I want my players to have. I want my players to be able to think about things. I want my players to be able to try to make that estimation of, okay, he's over there. We know that only one person knew about this thing, and we talked to them, and nobody knows where they are yet. It took us months to find it, and we know the bad guy doesn't know yet. So therefore we have time to try some things, right? I think that's to me that makes, I think, is a valuable thing for players to be able to have that and count on it. And it can kind of keeps us as GMs honest a little bit from just having folks just show up because we feel like, oh, wouldn't it be great if the antagonists just happen to show up right when the PCs are about to get the gem? Yes, it would, but I think it can feel cheap. And I know as a player, I can just say for absolutely certain that I know I felt like, boy, this is cheap when we feel like we've done all this work to get somewhere, and it just seemed like the antagonist just rode on our coattails. Nothing says, hey, nothing is what you're getting at. That limitations/weaknesses show not just be mechanical, should be psychological or thematic. I mean, you could tie all this stuff together, right? I think what I'm trying to say is when we're looking at mechanics are kind of how so there's two things, right? There's mechanics, which is how do we take a conceptual idea and it's the gamifying aspect, right? So if I'm a player, I'm thinking I need to climb up this castle wall, right? And then there's the mechanical part of, okay, I have a climb skill or however I'm doing it, and I'm going to roll the dice to do that. And I can say, okay, mechanically, these are my chances of doing it. And then I can say, okay, well, I need to then affect that. So there's two things. There's kind of the conceptually in the fiction, what can I do, and then try to do it. And then there's mechanically, well, how do we process what we're trying to do? So in some ways, I'm talking about at this point on the conceptual level of informing what your antagonist's plans are based not only on just somehow the meta needs of the story or the campaign, but what they can do and what they can't do. So you don't just put the antagonist behind the party because that's where you want them to be for some kind of meta excitement. You think about, well, what do they need to do to get there in the fiction? Then once you've established what they need to do to get there in the fiction, you can use fronts or you can use whatever kind of worksheet that you want to figure out mechanically the steps you're going to take to get them from A to B. So this part is more about determining what your kind of A to B is and looking at it in terms of how, on the one hand, you're the GM, you know everything, right? But you want to play your villains like they don't know everything. So part of that is thinking about, well, how is the villain not just me? And I think a lot of folks play them, at least until they get into the scene, as just kind of them. Well, the party discovered it, so the bad guy's behind them. The bad guy's basically always going to be one step behind them, which can be fine, but it can, like I said, it can feel kind of cheap. And it doesn't give the party a lot of options. The party just has to keep kind of pressing forward because the guy's right behind them. And if they do anything and the guy's right behind them, it's hard to take a gamble. Right, it's hard to gamble if you know that, okay, like a board game or something. If I know that I take 5 steps forward and the bad guy's always going to take 4 steps forward, then I'm never going to be able to take a detour. Because if I take the detour, the bad guy's caught up with me or past me. So I'm always taking 4 steps forward. If I know, however, that I can do something to slow them down, or I know that I have information they don't have, or I know that if I go in this area, they can't follow me, then that gives me opportunities. If I know that Strahd, as powerful as can't leave Barovia, but I have a couple of scroll uses where I can leave Barovia and I intend to come back, right, then I can leave and do something knowing that Strahd's going to have to sit tight. And if he's going to follow me, he's going to have to send somebody else to follow me because he can't come himself. So that gives me more opportunity and gives me more options. And I think as Strahd, it makes for a better bad guy because they're not just sort of omniscient, omnipotent. They have to make moves. They have to maybe be aggressive on the party. If I have the party has the only map to the place that has the Maltese Falcon that you need for your ritual, then it's not enough just to kind of show up. You need to make plans to try to get it off the party or figure out that the party has it to begin with. And what does that do? That now you're starting to think of those kind of plans within plans. Well, how can the bad guy do this? What resources does this antagonist have that they can deploy? What can they do? Right? Not just, oh, they're just going to be there to be there. Oh, they're just going to show up in the camp and steal it. And then, haha. No, they have to figure out, well, how are they going to steal it? Who's going to steal it? Is the antagonist themselves going to show up? How are they going to get there? Where is the antagonist now? If they're over there and it's going to take them 4 weeks riding to get over there, do they have a spell to teleport? If they don't, then that's probably step one. If the PCs are on the other side of the continent and the antagonist needs something now, they got to figure out where the PCs are and then get there. That gives them things to do, which then the PCs can try to then, right, counter. They can try to counter that. Oh, he's going to have to teleport to get there, maybe, or he's going to have to try to scry our location. We need something that's going to block the scrying. So then you get all these little games that are happening, right? That kind of, I'm going to do one, I'm going to do this, and they're going to do that. And all these counters and back counters. And that makes for a real chess match. I mean, that's kind of what chess is, right? Is this sort of point and counterpoint. But chess in these games work because there's limitations to all the pieces. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to kind of mirror what you do or whatever you do, I'm just going to be right there. No, it's about, well, if I take that bishop off the board, your opponent no longer has access to that bishop ability of running diagonally. So maybe as a player, I think I need to get that bishop off the board, or I need to, put something in there so that he's stuck in check, right? And if he moves the bishop, then we take his king, right? It's game over. So now his bishop is locked until they can figure out how to unlock that bishop, right? And that's all because your power has been sort of narrowed in scope in a way that's discoverable and not just what's on your character sheet. It's not just about, okay, well, he's a vampire, so he's, silver weapons do better, will damage them more. It's like, well, that's great, but that doesn't help the party until they're in combat with the vampire. But knowing that vampires can't be in sunlight, or they have to be in their coffin for 12 hours during the day, that is helpful to them outside, because if they know that, then they could think about, well, if we want to make a run at getting into that castle, we should do it during the day. We should get there right before dawn. Hopefully we're not spotted, so that we can get in dawn and have maximum time before the vampire gets out of the coffin. They can only do that if they know, and if that kind of weakness, that sort of limit of vampires exists. If there is no limit, then they can't plan like that. And maybe you have written down, hey, vampires got to be in there. But if they don't ever see it, or they can never discover it, then it's just there. And it's not useful in terms, so much in terms of the game. Let's see. Tank Pal says, that's why I do like the idea of an AI for a antagonist, to prevent them from being too me, and the players who know me can predict the antagonist. That's another good thing, right? If you're thinking in terms of, I'm going to set up some parameters that the antagonist has to exist within, those parameters, right, are separate from you. And yeah, there are times where I kind of think that probably that you can't help it, to some degree your players are going to kind of figure out your tendencies, whether it's your tendency to always be kind of sneaky or always use certain kinds of methods. But certainly you can flip the script around and say, well, what are the things that this antagonist is likely to do? Right. And that kind of works hand in hand. So going back to the ring wraiths, until Return of the King, when they sort of get powered up, they are not actually all that forceful. They are not particularly physical. But what tools do they have? So that's their limitations. They can move around at will, and they can move during the day, though it's not their strength. And they're not particularly physical. Not to say that it's easy to harm them, but that they're not about getting into and just going fisticuffs with folks and just stabby wherever they go. So those aren't their strengths. So those are some weaknesses, limitations. So now we can flip it around and say, okay, well, those are their weaknesses. What are they really good at? How do they operate? Because at that point, it's like, well, they seem kind of weak. Well, fear, right? The ring wraiths operate on fear. They generate fear. They work off of fear. Fear is their greatest weapon, really. Right. So great. So we have this kind of fearful aspect. They are tremendously powerful at night. At night, they really come into their own because they don't rely on sight. I think the sun, I don't know if they really say explicitly, but clearly they're bothered by the sun. The sun is gone. They can smell the blood of living things. At night, they are extremely formidable, right? They have tools like Morgul blades. And they're essentially immortal, or nearly, right? So they do have these things to their advantage, and you could easily write down or keep track of those as well, right? We have these limits that they have, and then we look at their strengths, and of course their strengths should not override their limits. If you has this weakness, hey, the ring wraiths or vampires are not great in the sun, then clearly their strengths should be, hey, they're great in the sun, right? These should be things that are balanced. So it makes sense that if you're weak in the sun, that maybe you're better during the night. And so, hey, you kind of have a sort of a balance there. Linkian says, expanding on the chess metaphor, getting closer to the king, you have the long-term goal to take out their allies and weaken their forces, right? And also knowing how the king moves, right? Part of chess is, and I always see in games like chess, right, you know off the bat how each piece can move. Part of that challenge is getting into a spot, right, to checkmate, in which you have anticipated all the possible moves the king can make, either through them or their proxies, their allies, and eliminated them. So if we put that into game terms, how can we set up our antagonists so that there are these concepts of what are the limits of the moves that they can do? How do we limit their moves? Or what limits can we place on their moves to allow the players to try to checkmate them? And in so doing, we move from a potentially very linear structure of essentially go to wherever the castle is, bang down the door, fight your way to the throne room, and kill the antagonist, because that's where they are, and that's where they were going to sit essentially until the party comes for them. For thinking about things in a more open, especially if you like kind of a more sandboxy style campaign that I like, that this antagonist is going around doing stuff and trying to get to whatever they're going to get to. As the party, you're going to have to trap them. You're going to have to tie them down and figure out, how can I remove their allies? How can I stop them from doing things? How can I checkmate them? And you can't really think about that unless we can say as players that, like a particular piece on the chessboard, this piece, this antagonist, they can do some things, but there are other things that they cannot do. And therefore I have some way of then looking at a finite set of things and saying, okay, I know they're great at these. Can I take those away? I know they're weak at this, right? So I can play to those, right? The king can move in any direction, but he can only move one square at a time. So he's got that strength that, unlike every other piece but the queen, he's not limited to which way they can go, but his great weakness is they can only move that one space. How can I use it to my advantage? So if I have an antagonist, some great villain, how can I take whatever his powers are and shrink them down? Not necessarily shrink them down, but put particular limits on them to make them sort of something that becomes a gameable idea, a concept that can be exploited in the game. And then as I'm thinking as the antagonist, I'm thinking about, how do I preserve myself against my weaknesses, right? In chess, the king, you're using all the other pieces to try to block out everybody from you and get to their guy by before they get to you, right? That's the thing, is you can't do very much. You can move in any direction, but at a very slow pace. But you get to command everybody else and have them move and basically eat damage and take up spots and block progress. That's what your antagonist should be doing. And instead of thinking about it on a meta level of, well, I just want them to be there for a scene or for a moment, think about what kind of moves are they making and why. And as another thing, right, often when we look back at adventures we've played or campaigns, sometimes you get these inconsistencies. Well, why did the bad guy just show up there? Or why did they do this instead of that? Sometimes it's, as a player, it's totally unknowable, and the GM will say, oh, well, it was because of this or that, or the GM will make up something on the spot. Because I just wanted them there to make a scene, right? I wanted the bad guy, because you'll get stuff like, I see this on Reddit and Facebook everywhere. Well, I want to have the bad guy show up just to kind of put the fear into them. Okay, but that doesn't really, if you think about, why is the antagonist trying to put the fear into a random group of adventurers, or maybe they're not even adventurers at this point? Why is that a thing? There's no reason for it. It's there for this meta thing of, I, as the GM, want the players to feel this thing. It doesn't make any sense. If you start to think about it, it's just there for this kind of idea of the moment. But what if instead I start thinking about, well, maybe the party could be doing something, and maybe this antagonist is not a great wizard yet. They're just a relatively, maybe a little bit more experienced in the party, but a relatively not powerful necromancer, and they need something that the party is about to get, or they need to be there. Suddenly you have this moment that has a little bit more depth to it, other than just they're there because they want to be there. Bob Monsell says structured randomness is the DM's friend. Absolutely. And I think a large part of using randomness is that it's that behind the screen thing of the randomness. It should not seem random to the players, right? And obviously, if you've been in any of these streams, you've watched my videos, you know how much I love randomness. And it is in sense of giving structure to the randomness. Sure, our antagonists can show up anywhere, but but why are they gonna show up there? What is the reason? What do they need? And thinking about what they need, not just in terms of the linear plot of my story. Well, we're going for the Rod of 7 Parts. So of course, this villain is also going out for the Rod of 7 Parts. And so he'll be there to try to prevent the party or get the parts for himself. Okay, but why? Right? Why does it need the Rod of 7 Parts? And how is it trying to go after the Rod of 7 Parts? And is it just showing up place after place because just that's where the party is? right? Let's mix up a little bit. Let's think about, well, maybe the bad guy doesn't go for the same parts that the player party goes after. Maybe they discover different parts. Maybe they take a different tack altogether. I think you can avoid a lot of kind of cliches by thinking that way. So I think we end up in these traps of always thinking about the same things, right? Well, like I feel like every GM comes up with this idea, and I don't think enough people say, "Hey, why don't you try something else?" The whole, my antagonist is going to be the party's sponsor, and they're going to send them after all the Rod of Seven Parts, and once they get them all, they're going to turn on the party. Like no one's thought of that before. Like your party's not going to probably figure that out if they're experienced at all within probably moments after this weird fellow shows up who starts asking you to go find the parts of Rod of Seven Parts for them. Is going to think this guy's probably the villain, right? Doesn't that seem risky? Aren't there probably less independent-minded henchmen that they could try to get to use it, right, or to do these things? You can end up in kind of cliche territory, and it's not really, I wouldn't say it's anyone's fault. It's just that's kind of how we think. Well, how can we kind of shake loose of these cliches? We could try to think about in the fiction, right? What does my bad guy need? What does he need? What does he need to get to? How does he get there? And I think that the first part is thinking about, well, what are their capabilities and what do they lack? And then I would think that whatever they're seeking in the game is going to fulfill some lack that they have. They need the Rod of Seven Parts because that rod can do something for them that they can't do for themselves. Okay, so then we have to think of the question, well, what can't they do for themselves? And then that starts to open up things of not only what do they want, but what will they need to get there? And then we could think about all the kind of mechanical stuff of, okay, let's do some rolls. Let's figure out a table. Let's figure out a chart, a flow chart, right? All that stuff can come afterwards. But the first thing we need to do is figure out, okay, where does this creature's power stop? Like, where does their capabilities end? And then what do they need to do to increase those capabilities or overcome those limits or go to the places that they can't go or do the things that they can't do? Let's see, got some stuff in the chat, so let me just catch up on there. Bob Monsell says, the mantra of one of my old groups is always the dice never lie. They never lie, though. They can fib, potentially. But yeah, I think that's a good a good saying. Though, of course, depending on your group and how your GM goes with fudging dice, they may very well lie, but you may never see those dice roll. I don't know that many GMs fudge when they're rolling the dice openly. That reminds me of like history may not repeat, but it often rhymes. I think that's a phrase I've heard. Frederick says, Fred Flunk played the Orc King in one of the earliest Blackmore games. Okay, cool. I guess the point of that being that they took on the persona of this villain. I think I've seen that come up in different groups, like having somebody step in and play the antagonist. And I think that could work under the right circumstances if you get somebody who is on the same wavelength with you, right? Back to, we mentioned on the stream yesterday how important tone can be. And if you guys have the same tone and you can communicate to them kind of what they need and what resources they have, and of course, what resources they don't have, and letting them sit down and come out with the game plan, I think that could work really well. I've often thought about that for, hey, you come in and you tell me what this guy's moves are going to be, and I'll do them in game, but you tell me what their overall moves are. And yeah, that does kind of take you out of that seat of having to try to think for them and sort of separate out what you know as the referee versus what you know as this particular creature. And it also does force you to really communicate to somebody else, here's what their capabilities are and here's what they can't do. Because otherwise you're not going to get back reasonable suggestions, right? If it's just, the Orc King's just going to teleport with 1 million troops wherever the party is. It's like, well, they don't have a teleportation spell and they don't have 1 million troops. So you got to give me something else, right? So it does force you to kind of address the question here of, well, what can't the antagonist do? And therefore giving you ideas into what they need to do. And again, like I want to stress, it also allows your party to try to anticipate what they need to do, right? So Gandalf can see what's happening in Mordor and can see that once Sauron gets this piece of information, he has to take certain steps. That gives him ideas for what to do, as opposed to just Sauron's going to show up somewhere because he's bound to. No, he has to do certain things. That gives if you were playing Gandalf, that gives you the freedom to think about, what chances do I want to take? what risk do I want to take? Because I know certain things about how both Sauron, what he can do, but also really importantly, what Sauron cannot do. And this, of course, can evolve, during the game, right? Maybe Sauron at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring couldn't cover the land, or at least Gondor, in a darkness, but by the Return of the King, they can, right? So it doesn't have to be static throughout the course of the campaign. It could be something that grows or ebbs. The other thing is, maybe in a different world, the party could have found out Sauron's plan a little bit and maybe thwarted him covering the land in a darkness. And therefore, at the end, when Sauron could use to do it, he can't, because the party nixed that plan, right? That's the kind of freedom for your party to kind of pick and choose their battles, pick and choose their risks. I thought the players were the big bad evil guy. I mean, if you're playing as the antagonist, presumably the party at some point or other does become your antagonist, right? Every antagonist is the protagonist of their own story. Hey, Terrence, did you miss the stream? Well, not all of it. No, you're still good. Frederick Gore said, I had so much fun chasing them with villagers and torches. Yeah, that's always fun. And then we get Bob Mostel saying, I like the Alexandrian philosophy of not prepping plots, but instead prepping situations. Combine that with structured randomness to change the situation. And boom. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of prepping plots, though. I think I mean plots in this case as linear series of events, and not plots as in plans, because prepping your antagonist plans, I think, is good in a general sense, right? What does Sauron need to do? What is I'll try to find another villain. Like, right, what does Voldemort need to do, right? And maybe those are situations where I think in fiction, and of course in our games too, like, why are people going to look back at Voldemort as a great villain, 50, 100 years from now? I don't know, because I don't know why really Voldemort is doing the things he's doing. I mean, I guess I don't get a great sense from the movies. He's kind of chasing Potter sometimes Potter's chasing him. I get that Potter and his friends are trying to get rid of those Horcruxes, right? Because those essentially are keeping him here, are allowing him to remain in whatever quasi-living state. I guess he's a bit like a lich in that regard, that, hey, got to get rid of them. So he has to probably prevent them at some point. But there are other points where he seems to go out of his way into Hogwarts, at least the first couple books, to kind of mess with Potter. And it doesn't really make sense why he's there. Like, why are you here? I mean, especially when, I guess at the end, you realize in retrospect that, I guess, spoilers if anyone cared, but like Potter himself, I haven't read the books, so it's the movies, right? Potter himself is a Horcrux. So if he would have destroyed Potter in the first book, that would have brought him in some ways closer to his destruction. Like, is it just vengeance? I don't totally get it. And like with, I think with many things, right? It seems like in the beginning of the first movie, and again, I don't know the books, he's got a weakness, right? He can't take physical form, and he has to keep feeding off of like unicorns, or I don't know what I say. Like, he doesn't have his own separate form, so he has to kind of hitch rides on other creatures and presumably share his consciousness with them. I don't know, but dominate them in some way. That's a real weakness, because he can't just go do whatever he wants. He's trapped on the back of that goofy professor's head and can only do what that guy can do, and then only within reason, because if he were to go too far, if he were to make himself known too much, the gig is up. So he's very limited. He's very powerful in some ways, but he's extremely limited. As the series goes on, though, it becomes less clear kind of what he can or can't do. But again, I don't know the books, but it is a kind of an interesting idea. I think when you look at a lot of villains, Thomas Covenant, which I've mentioned before, right? The antagonist there was his name, Lord Vile, right? Cast to work through proxies because they are trapped outside the sort of rim of the world. I forget what they call it, and cannot act directly. I mean, I think they can taunt and do some things, but they have to act either indirectly or subtly or through their servants. So there are limitations there, right? It can't just be where it needs to be. Lord Vile can't just show up and just push Covenant off a cliff. He's got to maneuver one of his servants to try to do that dirty work. Bob also says, yeah, anywhere you've seen a module after the players do X, then ... danger, Will Robinson. Yes. I think I definitely prefer modules that, give you some concept of here's what the antagonist is trying to do, and maybe even give you a mechanic, because I think some things it makes sense. I mean, for most things, I like rolling dice. I think just what are we rolling dice to determine? And if you're someone who has looked at it and said, okay, I know my cult of Orcus needs to get from 0, there's a handful of cultists, to summoning Orcus, right? What do they need to do? Well, at the beginning, what are their limits? They're just a few guys who are, I don't know, they've been bedazzled by Orcus and they're in his service, right? But they are weak. They don't have spells. They don't have a temple. They don't have access to the artifacts that they need. They may not even know the spell, right? Those are some severe limitations, but maybe they do have some things they can do, which is maybe one of them is a fairly influential figure so that they can start making moves, securing political clout, or at least maybe figuring out ways to get political power. Maybe that's something they can do, or they have wealth so that they can spend it somewhere, right? But you start thinking about, okay, they need all this stuff. So now I can think about the steps to get to the stuff they need. And then I can think about, okay, now that I know what they need, now I'm going to try to think about in my world, okay, they need a temple, and the temple has to be in kind of a forlorn spot. Maybe it has to be on a ley line. Maybe it needs to be, they're going to need undead. So maybe they want to be somewhere undead, or at least somewhere they can make it. Maybe it doesn't have to be a temple, but they have to be able to make it into a temple, and it's got to be kind of out of the public eye as much as possible. Where on the map might that be? I'm not sure. Or maybe I find a spot saying, oh, this is a good spot, but it's, 8 hexes away and over a mountains and things. So I say, okay, that's going to take a long time for them to find. If that's the closest, best spot, then I can say, okay, that's going to take a bunch of dice over time for them to explore around and get kind of word of this particular necropolis that's, half forgotten, right? So then that sets up, well, okay, that's now how long they're going to take to get there. That's the kind of thing that I think this is really helpful for. But, the mechanics part is definitely the other side of it. But I find it's this first part is more difficult, at least for me, more challenging. And then figuring out what mechanically I need to do. Usually with this stuff, it comes down to just kind of what % chance I want to give it, which is fairly easy to hash out. And you can go back and forth. Is that a 5% chance? Or is it a 10% chance? Or is it a 5% chance every month of game time? Or is it a 1% chance every week of game time? Like you can figure that out however you like, right? But ultimately, I think the harder thing is trying to figure out what they need to get done. And that really comes down to what do they need, and why do they need things is because these are things they can't do themselves. So creating those limits then tells you what they need, which then informs you how they need to, informs what they need, and then informs also how the things they need to do to get there. They can't just fly and get to the necropolis because they say necropolis and then do like I Dream of Jeannie and blink their eyes or twitch their noses like Bewitched. They got to do the legwork, right? And how long does that take? And then of course, what are the party doing if the party find out about this necropolis before them, right? What do they do? That's the kind of, I feel like those are the fun mind games, the fun the chess match. That's the fun chess match. Oh, whoops! I missed. I highlighted the comment and then didn't read it. Terrence says, Voldemort's deal was that he was so obsessed with being dominant, he made a prophecy about himself failing to come true, or failing come true. Oh, I see. He made a prophecy about himself failing come true by trying to prevent it. Okay. I guess I wonder though, why start with Potter, right? Why not get everybody else in line? But that there's a different thing, right? That was certainly. It's something else that comes up, right? And Sauron had similar. He had a weakness of thought. Sauron's mind was fixed, right? Sauron could not understand anybody getting a weapon, an artifact like the ring, and not using it for power. He could not comprehend someone getting the ring in their hands and thinking, "I need to destroy it." So that was a real limit and a real weakness, not of his powers, not of his capability, but of his mentality, which is another great aspect to think about, right? What sort of limits, right? None of us can think of everything. As a GM, though, we try to get all around the subject, figure out all these things. But it's helpful to think of our bad guys thinking, hey, this antagonist, he's not going to think in terms of, in Sauron's case, in terms of not, he's always gonna think of everything in terms of power. This person's going to get that, and they want power, right? Power, that's the only currency. Power and maybe fear that he really gets. He doesn't get these other kinds of emotions. Voldemort potentially could say, hey, Voldemort, he cannot live with this guy running around, even if he's not saying it himself, that people are saying about him that he withstood Voldemort, right? Cannot stand it, cannot deal with it. So he's blinded to other things because he just feels like he's got to get his win back, so to speak, right? Potter, even though it wasn't purposeful, whatever, Potter defeated him. He's got to get that back, and he just can't see other things. And that blinds him to what other folks might be doing. Let's see. Frederick says, instead of a temple or shrine, a statue might suffice. We're going back to my example of the Orcus Skull. Yeah, sure. I mean, the specifics we can come up with, whatever. That was just, that was just an example. Absolutely. Oh, Michael Morrissey corrects me on my Thomas Covenant villain, Lord Fowl. Thank you. I don't know why I said Lord Vile. I was close. It's been a long time since I read it. I do want to go back and read it again, though, sometime. Frederick Ork said the ring had a sort of intelligence that would corrupt the wearer into using it. Yes, it does, but but that's not the same thing, right? Yes, Sauron, I'm sure he knew somewhat that the ring would do that, but the ring, from Sauron's perspective, don't remember, the ring's been lost for eons, and somehow, even though it corrupted Gollum, the movie portrays it like Sauron knows when someone's put the ring on, and that's not the case. Gollum had the ring off and on for ages. Bilbo had the ring on, I think, for weeks at a time in The Hobbit. And I know things weren't fully fleshed out in The Hobbit in the same way. But the movies make it seem like you put the ring on and Sauron's eye is right there saying, I see you. But that's not the truth of it. It's not the case. In Mordor, maybe, but not really outside of Mordor. But Sauron just fundamentally could not comprehend somebody taking the ring and then literally bringing it to Mordor to destroy it. That's why he jumps on those kind of false, what's the word I'm looking for? Those diversions that the Fellowship sets out for him, which is one thinking that once he thinks that Pippin has the ring, taking Pippin to Gondor, because Sauron, of course, is going to think that you're taking the ring to a place of strength to do, for power, and then that Aragorn has the ring, and that's why he's marching on Mordor, right? It's all power. He could not comprehend in his wildest dreams that someone would get this immensely powerful artifact and not use it that way. And that's totally separate from the ring's corrupting, influence. I don't even know that Sauron meant for the ring to be corrupted. Because remember, the one ring is for him. It wasn't like the other rings that he gave out, the 9 and the 7 and he was only a little bit related to the 3 elven rings. But remember, the one ring was for Sauron's use. I think the corruption is because it's so filled with Sauron's essence, and he is so corrupted that you cannot help but be corrupted by it. I don't think he put it in there like this is how the ring is used, because this was his ring, and I don't think he anticipated losing it. Michael Morrissey says, yes, limits and motivations are key. Absolutely. Terrence says, I would put the ring on just to talk to the big creepy eye, like really get annoying with it. He'd send the wraiths just to keep me from waking up at 3 a.m. to talk about Star Trek. Yeah, that's, it's probably good that Sauron wouldn't show up in the internet age, because he might even not even be the worst villain, at this point. Yeah, I mean, it's, we're getting a whole other thing about sort of different media and their interpretations of things, but I think the movies, as far as the Lord of the Rings, the movies have, and I'm sure Harry Potter too, though I just don't know them. I just don't know the Harry Potter books at all. I am reading through now on the second book with my daughter. We're kind of doing it. My wife, my daughter, and I kind of reading through very slowly the Potter books, because she kind of digs them. Well, my wife read them, and then my daughter's been enjoying them. But we're so early on, I don't have a lot of the lore. But certainly, I think that in some ways the movies did a bit of a disservice in Lord of the Rings to some of the way things worked. One, Sauron was not this disembodied eye on the top of the tower, though it does also illustrate, again, if you wanted to play him that way, another weakness. Sauron can physically not leave that tower. So there are things that it can't do, right? Which is good, which then, again, sets other things in motion. Bob Moss says, I'm going to need a trigger warning before we get to the corrupted Palantir. Yes. Well, things work differently. I think the idea with the Palantir, which I really like, the Seeing Stones, was simply that, you're kind of, I don't know exactly how they work. I have to look at more in some of the things, right? But the Palantir, it's more about Sauron being able to manipulate what the viewer could see. But I haven't gotten that far in my rereading of stuff. Michael Morrissey says Lord Bile is cool. I guess you mean Lord Vile. Yeah, he was, or Lord Bile. Oh, that's playing off my joke. Yes, Lord Bile is cool. I was saying Vile, but Lord Bile is also very cool. If there was things, there are political settings like Mystara. Yes, though I'm not specifically talking about political settings are great, and I'm not though. This is neutral to what kind of setting you're running. This isn't something I would particularly say is for political settings or not. Though, of course, you have a lot more variables to work with in a good way with the political setting, right? As opposed to, I'm trying to think, what is it? Isn't every setting have some kind of political stuff? Or, maybe we're talking about what the focus is on, because, every setting is going to have leaders and things. I guess it's whether these are things that you feel like your party is going to get, your players are actually going to get involved in. Okay. Mom says, I'm uncomfortable with Palantir / internet connected PC pals. I see. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. There's probably some interesting topic in there for someone who's much more learned in such things than I am. Though it's like it's another kind of neat thing, right? Is the Palantir as just a fantasy kind of artifact. Again, it's got strengths, limitations, and weaknesses, right? You can reach out, see distant places. At the same time, you are kind of putting yourself at risk. If a strong influence like Sauron can twist what you see, you can become, you can lose, you fall into the shadow that way, right? So it's this great tool with weaknesses and limits, but it plays into it's, but it's got a strength that most people don't have, which is that most people can't see far. And so you get this tool that fulfills that, right? Sauron's got it, so it does give him some abilities to look out there, but he got tricked by it as well, right? So that same kind of thing came back to get him also. Frederick Ork says political settings, no real antagonists target more ideals and motivations. Okay, but I would say that maybe in a political setting, I wouldn't say no real big bad evil guy. I would say maybe no single big bad evil guy, right? There's no overwhelming antagonist, but there could be many smaller antagonists. And a particular campaign could involve one of those antagonists that for an adventure or campaign is the antagonist, right? There's just not the world versus someone kind of thing. And I think most settings now tend not to be, right? The kind of I feel like the high fantasy setting is somewhat out of vogue, kind of. I guess in Harry Potter, Voldemort is the one single antagonist, but it's not like everyone's united against him, or at least that doesn't come across so much in the books. Other than that, I think more things have gone. I guess Game of Thrones did have the, whatever his name was, the Ice King or not King of the North, whatever. Though, that kind of was a fizzle. But ultimately, that wasn't really the thing. Terrence says, I think given enough time, the party will make. Yeah, I mentioned this on the stream yesterday, and actually I think the other stream on my thing. And yes, I think given enough time and opportunity, a party will create their own antagonist. Absolutely true. Tank Pal says dark fantasy and Game of Thrones changed the trend in media. Yeah, I'm not sure it'll swing back. It probably will, right? I think that I'm sure there's something where we're looking at what people perceive in the world. We're sort of in a post Cold War, post World Wars age, right? When it was easy after World War II to look at things, even though it wasn't quite so simple as having sort of a singular evil that has that sort of free peoples or the free whatever good forces are kind of going up against. But I don't think it's not as easy to think that way now. I think we're more apt to see lots of smaller. Maybe there's still a force of evil, capital E, but maybe but not a singular. Though, okay, of course, Thanos, right? Thanos was essentially that world versus figure. So I guess it's not, and Endgame is pretty recent. So I guess it still exists in some forms, but yeah, it's changing. Yep. Oops, vial. Yeah, it's no problem. I was thinking of the Vials, right? Those are Lord Foul's servants, right? The Vials. Have I got that? Have I got that correct? At least, I think maybe not. Well, there goes another hour. Any last comments, questions? I hope I was able to impress a little bit about maybe how you can incorporate thinking about what your villains can't do, what limits they have on their powers, and how that can inform the decisions they make and the steps they have to take, and how that can make sort of a more complex situation for your party to interact with. I definitely think it gives your party, the players, if they can discover these things, and they do discover them, a multitude of vectors to try to deal with the antagonist. It sets out clear paths for you to plan what your antagonist needs to do. If that's something that you think it's too broad, oh my gosh, what do they need to do? Well, think about what they can't do, and that will help tell you what they need to do to accomplish whatever their goal is, right? You sort of create that negative space and figure, well, how do they fill it? There's a gap between them and this thing, and they need this thing because they can't do a thing. Now they got to get there. Bob Monson says 3 evil brothers, Foul, Vile, and Vile. Yeah, and the black sheep, as Terrence says, Lord Smile. Yeah, that's the foul lord of dentistry. Yeah. Bob also the real antagonist setting up the evil dentist, Lord Smile. See, Michael Morrissey says sometimes the limits and motivations of the various faction leaders can create the game's politics all by themselves. Yes, I think that's probably a very succinct way of what I've been probably circling around saying. Right, is you can create a lot of complex situations by having you could start with very simple pieces, like in chess, right? I mean, chess is a really great example, or Go or something, right? Very simple pieces, but they're interacting in these ways, in all these different ways that create complexity. And each one of them can't do everything itself. So it has to plot out, right? You want to use your knight piece. You have to plot out to get the thing you want, to take those odd foot motions, step around to get to the place you need to get to. Can't go right there. That means you have to create a strategy to get your knight to that spot. And for other pieces and all that, how do you open the places up? How do you try to get your opponent to be where they need to be so that your knight can swoop in and get it? And that's really the crux of it, right? But all these interactions come up, all these ideas of strategy come up because the knight, this piece, can't just go wherever it needs to go. It needs to figure out. And I think it's easy as a GM to just fall into I'm just going to put the evil guy, I'm just going to put my antagonist here just because. Or I'm going to put it here because it's going to make this moment. But I think that often those moments feel manufactured. And I think I was kind of hinting at this before, but I feel like as a player, when I was in those situations, I definitely felt a little bit of that, this moment's being generated, not by stuff that's happening in the game, but because of other concerns. Whereas as a player, just like as a GM, I think I want players to feel like they earn the progress that they make. They got the stuff because they earned it. I didn't hand it to them. They went and got it. As a player, I think you want to think that the antagonists are also earning whatever they're getting, and not just because they're showing up because it's expedient, right? Earn it. We had to go find the stuff. You got to go find the stuff. Now, of course, no one's expecting you as a GM to play sessions and sessions by yourself while you walk the antagonist through doing all the stuff, but you can simulate that through dice, through mechanical methods, but still showing or demonstrating these ways that your antagonist is earning their progress to their goals the same way you're expecting the party to earn their progress to their goals. All right, Bob Mossel's got a couple things in here. In World Without Number, the factions are rated for force, cunning, and wealth, and I think I need to look into if they subsume some sort of social rating. That's very interesting. So they kind of got their own, almost like a little character sheet. So I wonder about the design patterns that would be best for dramatic gameplay. 1 from each, or 2 force and 1 cunning. Or, yeah, I guess I'll have to look at it, right? Because it kind of comes into what are they using those values for, right? What do they mean? So there's 2 things. There's the mechanics of what they mean. So you could say something and say, okay, once I've got goals, and I'm going to go back to Lord of the Rings just because I know it and it's simple, right? Sauron wants the ring. Sauron has to first, he wants the ring, and he knows two things. The ring is in the Shire, and the ring is with someone named Baggins, who presumably is in the Shire. So he has to get information, right? Shire and Baggins. That's what he knows for the key. So we know what his goals are. I'm just going to go back to this other comment just so I can keep it. He's got force, cunning, and wealth. Or I would maybe rename wealth resources, because in Sauron's case, is it wealth? It is a bit, but it's also he has these resources. He has seemingly endless supply of orcs. He's got the ring wraiths. He's got potentially birds, beasts, and other things, creatures that can spy for him. And of course, he does have actual wealth, because it's made a point of that the ring wraiths essentially try to bribe people, right? Tell me where Baggins is. Tell me where, whatever Bag End is, or where Hobbiton is, or where Shire is, and I'll come back with a bag of gold. I mean, they literally do try to buy information. So we know they do have actual wealth. So do you come up with a D20 type roll with a difficulty, a challenge rating, and then use those numbers as a modifier to that roll? In this case, I would say it would be that wealth/resources roll. Do you do that? If we were, say, to go in the Silmarillion, and Sauron is trying to slowly twist the Númenórean king to start worshiping Morgoth and sever their ties with Valinor and actually go to war with them, that would certainly be cunning. And of course, when you're trying to storm Mordor, you would use force, right? So I could see those being, on the mechanical side, but I could also see them as being modifiers that you use to figure out their planning stage. So you could use it to inform what they're going to do. If your antagonist is very strong in cunning, then you want to think about, and they're weak in force, then you want to figure out, okay, they're going to lean into cunning strategies and they're going to avoid force strategies. And they're probably going to try to use their cunning to gather force, since presumably they might need it and they don't have it. So in a sense, it's fulfilling the same functions as like limitations, right? And weaknesses are. I'm strong in cunning, so I'm going to do as much cunning as I can, and I'm going to try to shore up my weaknesses, which may be force and wealth, or maybe force. I'm going to try to shore those up. So immediately give me ideas for what do I need to do. I'm really cunning, but I'm not strong. So I got to use my cunning to get strong allies, right? A bunch of things in here. All right, Bob Mossel, I'm running through these. So Bob Mossel says, so I wonder about the design patterns. Oh, okay, I got that one already. The best for dramatic play. Okay, got that one. Bob Mossel, their faction actions. Each faction could take each abstract turn. Yeah, I've definitely seen that in some of the, I think, kind of Powered by the Apocalypse games. Bob Mossel's restraining themselves from going into the mechanical weeds. Hello, my name is Bob, and I'm a simulationist and a war gamer. Hello, Bob. Bob Mossel says, Sauron takes the stealth action to search with a cunning resource. Yeah, I mean, that could be basically it. Taryn says, ring wraith bribe. Hiss, cuts off head. Yeah, that's the kind of funny thing. Like in the movies, right, they chop off or they slice down, run down some kind of hobbit. In the books, they don't. In fact, some of the hobbits actually successfully kind of tell them off, and they are sticking strictly to bribing, which again shows off this weakness of theirs, that they either are not ready to or cannot simply march around slicing and dicing hobbits, that they're relying on fear, intimidation, and potentially greed on the parts of the folk that they're dealing with. Nazgul and Gollum are stealth resources, says Bob Mossel. Absolutely. So yeah, you could probably look at those in a couple different ways. I guess this is all telling me I feel like there's a very strong hint that I should get into Worlds Without Number to check these out, to check some of these out more. It seems like they should be very useful. And yeah, I feel like we could definitely, try to think about our antagonists all as kind of in factional ways, because a lot of games have tools for factions, and you could apply those specifically to your antagonists as a faction, either themselves as their own faction, or if they're the leader of a faction, however you see them. Let's see, got some more here. Terrence says Farmer Maggot is the GOAT. Yep, Farmer Maggot just tells him off. You will not come back here. I do not want that gold. Tank Person is very excited about World Without Numbers, such an amazing looking toolkit. Yeah, I got to get into it. I will have to get into it. I don't have a hard copy. I think I just have the PDF of the free version of the rules. I'll have to see what I can say on that one, but I will get into it. All right, so going on an hour 15. So this is a good place to call it. Any last comments? Like I said, I hope this was useful. I hope that everyone enjoyed it. I appreciate everyone hanging out with me on the chat. I'm happy so far that my days have still had these open spaces where I can do these. Oh, Bob Mostel coming in. Find myself being drawn to the dark side of having some mechanical framing around the player's actions. What kind of framing are you talking about, Bob Mostel? Because there already is a fair amount of framing around player actions, just in terms of that they have to roll dice and they have to, there are abilities or things that sort of, frame them. Are you talking about something more general? Maybe we should get into it in another. I would be curious to hear more about what kind of framing that you would like to see, or like a formal day turn. But I mean, isn't that kind of, I see. Wouldn't day turns be essentially like I think there's lots of rules for downtime, and I think day turns kind of have a natural. We have stuff for essentially how far you travel in a day. We have stuff for what you're doing in a dungeon. The only thing that maybe aren't specific rules for is if you're just kind of doing stuff in the city. But I think that there are downtime. I mean, that would be kind of what I would think about would be downtime rules, which is that sort of how can we mechanically, what can we basically mechanically abstract away some of the little encounters or things like research that aren't really an encounter necessarily, right? But it's just the party getting work done. So I feel like there is stuff there, but maybe there's different ways to think about it other than, downtime, which kind of suggests stuff you do in between adventures as opposed to stuff you might do that really is the crux of an adventure. So maybe some food for thought there. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging. Thanks for chatting. I will hopefully be able to talk to you tomorrow. Hey, before you go, give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Oh, half of you have already left. Darn it. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. That stuff helps me out a lot. Let's see, just to finish this off, from Bob Mosel, pull the adventuring party into the faction system in a more formal way. I think I have seen stuff like that, right? I think I've definitely seen that, where giving the party kind of party resources and tracking that in some way. I think that lends itself to more of a like a birthright style campaign, right? Where you have, in this case, we're calling it a faction, but birthright would be your duchy or your little province or a little dukedom or, your little domain, which you might have ratings for, and then you can improve and do things. But it's an interesting idea, right? How you would, because I think the things you'd want to think about, right, are one, what attributes is the group going to have? How do you calculate those attributes? And then, things they can do with them, and do they get improved? Do they just improve with the player levels? How does that work? But it might be some interesting things to think about. And Tank Pal says, Blaze in the Dark has that as an idea in its system Forged by Darkness. All right, cool. We got more things to read about. All right, folks. I got food for thought as usual. Hopefully I've given you guys some food for thought as usual. As usual. That's a lot of as usual. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your day, night, weekend, whenever you're watching or listening to this. Game on. I'll talk to you later.